The night was cold, and snow covered the forest like a white blanket. Inside the wooden cabin, the fire was almost dying, sending small sparks into the air. A man named Ethan sat alone at the wooden table, sharpening a hunting knife and listening. To the silence of the night, his cabin was far from the nearest town, and visitors almost never came, especially in the middle of a freezing night. That was why the sudden knock on his door made him freeze. It was not a gentle knock, but hard, desperate, and fast, like someone begging to be let in. Ethan stood up, his hand tightening around the knife handle. He walked slowly to the door, his boots creaking against the wooden floor. The knock came again, louder this time. Echoing in the quiet forest outside, he took a deep breath, pushed the latch, and pulled the door open. What he saw made him doubt his own eyes. There in the snow stood a woman unlike anyone he had ever seen. Her skin was pale purple, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Her long blonde hair hung loose and messy, wet from melting snow. Her clothes were torn, a red dress barely covering her body, with scratches on her arms and legs. Her bare feet were sinking into the snow, yet she did not move. She looked up at him with eyes full of fear and pain. Her voice shook as she whispered, "Please, help me." Ethan felt his heart beat faster. He had heard of strange beings in the galaxy, but never had he seen one with his own eyes. He wanted to close the door, to pretend this was a dream, but her trembling voice stopped him. The woman almost fell forward, her knees weak, her lips turning blue from the cold. Ethan quickly reached out, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her inside, the cabin filled with the smell of snow and blood. He placed her near the fireplace and threw more wood on the fire until it burned bright again. The woman curled near the flames, hugging herself tightly. Her skin was scratched, her dress torn, and her breathing heavy. Ethan took a blanket from his bed and covered her shoulders. She looked at him with wide eyes, as if not believing he would show kindness. For a long moment, there was only silence between them. Then, she spoke in a broken voice. "He left me here." "My husband," Ethan frowned, his knife still in his hand. "Your husband?" he asked, his voice low. The woman nodded, tears mixing with the dirt on her face. "He said I was dirty," she whispered, her words trembling. "My blood is not pure. My family is hated, so he abandoned me at your door." Her voice cracked, and she covered her face with her hands, shaking like a child lost in the cold. Ethan stared at her, confused and cautious. Why would an alien man leave his own wife with a human stranger, deep in the forest, in the middle of the night? It did not make sense, unless it was some kind of cruel punishment. Still, he could see the truth in her eyes, the raw fear and despair. She was not lying. She was broken. "Rest," Ethan said finally, his voice softer than before. "You are safe here, for now." The woman lowered her hands and looked at him, her lips trembling, as if she wanted to believe him, but could not. She pulled the blanket tighter around her and whispered, "They will come for me." "They always do." Ethan's chest grew heavy at those words. He looked toward the door. Hearing the wind howl outside, the firelight flickered on the walls, shadows dancing around them like restless spirits. For the first time in years, Ethan felt that his quiet cabin was no longer safe. The knock at midnight had changed everything. The woman leaned closer to the fire, closing her eyes. Her breathing slowed as the warmth began to heal her frozen skin. Ethan sat back down at the table, his knife lying on the wood, his eyes never leaving her. He could not trust her yet, and he knew she was hiding more than she said, but deep inside, something told him this was only the beginning. The knock at midnight was not just a cry for help, it was a warning. And whatever had abandoned her at his door might still be out there, watching, waiting, ready to return. Ethan tightened his jaw. The silence between them, heavy and sharp. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering every trace of footprints, every sign of who had left her there. But in his heart, Ethan knew the night was not as quiet as it seemed. The forest was holding its breath, and the true danger had only just begun. The fire burned brighter now, filling the cabin with warmth and soft orange light. The purple-skinned woman sat close to it, clutching the blanket around her shoulders, her eyes fixed on the flames as if she feared they might disappear. Ethan watched her carefully, his back against the wooden wall, his knife still lying on the table within easy reach. The silence stretched, broken only by the sound of the crackling wood and the faint whistling of the winter wind outside. After a long while, Ethan finally spoke. "You said your husband left. You hear?" he said in a steady voice. "Why at my door? Why not leave you anywhere else?" The woman did not answer immediately, her fingers playing nervously with the edge of the blanket. At last, she lifted her eyes toward him, her voice trembling but sharper than before. "He wanted me gone, but not dead," she whispered. "Leaving me with a human was punishment. Shame for me, shame for him. A way to erase me without blood on his hands." Ethan frowned, his chest heavy with questions. The woman shifted closer to the fire, her torn dress falling slightly to reveal more bruises along her arms and back. Her voice grew softer, carrying a weight of pain. "My people. They do not forgive mistakes, and I am their greatest mistake," she said. "My blood is mixed, my mother from one clan, my father from another. To them I am dirty, unworthy, cursed." Ethan's brows furrowed. It was strange to hear her talk of heritage and blood, as if it mattered more than life itself. To him, she was just someone broken, desperate, and abandoned. But the fear in her eyes told him this was deeper, darker, and far more dangerous than simple cruelty. "You're safe here," Ethan said quietly, though even as he said the words, he was not sure they were true. The woman looked at him with sudden sharpness, her lips trembling. "No one is safe when they come," she whispered. "And they will come. They always come." A chill ran through Ethan, despite the fire's warmth. He did not ask who they were, because he already knew it was no simple story of a broken marriage. Something larger was moving behind her words, something that stretched beyond his. "Quiet cabin in the woods, still," he said nothing more, and let silence fall again. The woman leaned her head against the wooden wall, eyes heavy with exhaustion, her breathing slowed, her body sinking under the weight of the blanket. Within minutes, she drifted into sleep, her chest rising and falling softly. Ethan remained awake, staring at her face, lit half in shadow, half in firelight. He wanted to believe her story, but a part of him whispered that she could be hiding something. The night passed slowly, each hour dragging longer than the last. Ethan dozed lightly in his chair, but his hand never left the table where the knife rested. Every creak of the wood, every gust of wind against the cabin walls made him tense. He had lived alone for many years, yet never had the forest around him felt so alive, so watchful. It was as if the trees themselves were holding secrets, waiting for something to break the silence. At dawn, Ethan stepped outside, the snow crunching beneath his boots. The air was sharp and cold, his breath rising like smoke in the pale morning light. He walked a short distance from the cabin, scanning the ground with cautious eyes. What he found made his stomach twist. Footprints, deep and heavy, circled the cabin, not just once, but many times, as if someone had walked around the house again and again through the night. Ethan crouched low, pressing his hand against one of the prints. It was larger than a human foot, the toes clawed deep into the snow. Something had been here, watching them, maybe even listening through the thin wooden walls. His eyes moved to the trees, their dark shapes standing tall against the white snow. Nothing moved, but he could not shake the feeling of being observed. His instincts screamed that the woman's words had been true. She was not just abandoned, she was hunted. Ethan returned to the cabin quickly. Shutting the door behind him, the woman was still asleep, her face calmer now than it had been in the night. But he knew peace would not last. Sooner or later, the ones who made those tracks would return, and when they did, they would not knock. He sat by the fire again, his eyes on the flames, his mind full of doubts. Why had fate brought her to his door? A man who had wanted nothing more than silence and solitude. Why had her alien husband chosen him, of all people, as the place to abandon her? There was no answer, only the crackle of the fire and the faint sound of her breathing. Ethan's jaw tightened as he looked at her again. She was fragile, broken. Yet there was something unyielding in her presence, even asleep. She clung to life like someone who refused to let go. He knew that whatever storm was coming, he had already been dragged into it. The stranger in his cabin was no longer just a guest. She was the beginning of a war he did not yet understand. Outside, the pale sun climbed higher, shining across the snow-covered forest. But for Ethan, the light brought no comfort. The footprints in the snow remained in his mind, clear and heavy. Proof that the forest was no longer empty, and that the knock at midnight had opened his door to something far larger, far darker than he ever imagined. The morning light filled the cabin with a pale glow, but it did not bring peace. Ethan sat by the window, his eyes on the endless white forest beyond. The fire still burned, though smaller now, its warmth fighting against the bitter cold behind him. The woman slept wrapped in the blanket, her breathing steady. He had not told her about the footprints. Not yet. The truth would only deepen her fear. And fear was already heavy in the room. At last, she stirred, her eyes fluttering open. For a moment, she looked calm, almost safe, until she noticed Ethan's expression. He was staring at her, his face sharp with thought. "What is it?" she whispered, her voice rough from sleep. Ethan hesitated, then finally said the words. There were tracks outside, circling the cabin. The woman froze, her blanket slipping slightly from her shoulders. Her eyes widened, filling with the same fear he had seen the night before. "They found me," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "They never stop, they always follow." She clutched the blanket tighter, as if it could protect her from the truth. Ethan leaned forward, his hands resting on the table. "Who are they?" he asked firmly. "Who is hunting you?" She shook her head, her blonde hair falling into her face. "My husband's clan, his brothers, his blood," she said. "They want me erased. They want the shame gone, and they will not care if you die with me." Her words hung in the air. Like a heavy weight, Ethan had lived with danger before, hunting in the mountains, facing storms that could kill a man, but this was different. This was not nature. This was deliberate. Someone had walked around his cabin in the dark. Watching, waiting, measuring. The thought made his skin crawl. The woman looked at him. Her voice breaking. "You should send me away. Human, if you keep me here, you will die with me." Ethan's jaw tightened, his eyes steady on hers. "I opened the door when you knocked," he said. "I don't throw people into the cold once they're inside." Her lips trembled, and for the first time since she had arrived, tears ran freely down her cheeks. She tried to wipe them away, but her hands shook. Ethan looked away, staring into the fire. Knowing that choices like this were never easy, he had chosen already, even if he had not spoken it aloud. Later, he stepped outside again, the cold biting into his skin. He followed the tracks a short distance, into the trees. The snow was fresh, and the prints were deep, sharp, and unhurried. Whoever had made them had not been running. They had been stalking, circling, patient. Ethan knelt, touching the edge of a print, feeling the faint outline of claws. These were not boots, not shoes, not anything human. His breath came out heavy. Mist rising into the frozen air. The forest was quiet. But to quiet, the kind of silence that pressed against a man's ears. He stood, his eyes scanning the shadows between the trees. Nothing moved. But he could feel the weight of unseen eyes. Someone was out there, waiting when he returned to the cabin. The woman was standing by the window. She looked at him with wide eyes, as if searching for answers he could not give. "They won't stop," she whispered again, her voice raw. "They believe I carry a curse, a blood that must be buried. If I survive, their shame survives." Ethan dropped the bundle of firewood he had carried back inside. "You're alive now," he said firmly. "That's all that matters." But even as he said it, the weight of the words pressed against him. How long could he keep her alive if hunters stronger than men came for her? The day passed slowly, shadows stretching long across the snow. Ethan worked quietly, chopping wood, checking his traps, sharpening his tools. The woman stayed inside, sitting near the fire, silent and watchful. Sometimes she asked questions. About Earth, about the forest, about why he lived so far from the towns. Ethan gave short answers, his mind always half listening to the woods. Her presence was strange, but not unwelcome, like a storm cloud sitting over his roof, warning of rain yet to fall as night returned. Ethan barred the door and set his tools near his bed. The fire glowed steady, filling the room with light and shadows. The woman sat across from him, her eyes fixed on the flames. "Do you believe me now?" she asked softly. Ethan looked at her, the image of the prince still fresh in his mind. "Yes," he said simply, "I believe you." Her shoulders shook with quiet relief, but she did not smile. Instead, she whispered, "Then you know. They will return." Ethan lay on his bed, but sleep did not come. The knock at midnight had opened more than his door. It had pulled him into a war that was not his, yet had already become his burden. The fire burned low. The woman curled tightly under the blanket. Outside, the snow fell silently, covering old tracks, but Ethan knew fresh ones would come soon. The hunters had found her trail, and they would not stop until they reached his door again. Asterisk. The forest was quiet, too quiet. Ethan carried 2 buckets. Heading toward the frozen stream not far from the cabin, the morning sun was weak, hidden behind clouds, giving the world a gray, heavy look. Beside him walked the alien woman, wrapped tightly in the blanket, her steps slow and careful. She had insisted on coming, saying she could not bear to stay alone in the cabin. Her eyes moved constantly, scanning the trees, her fear cleared with every breath. The snow crunched under their boots, every sound echoing like a warning. Ethan said nothing, but his hand tightened around the wooden handle of his axe. He had brought it not only for chopping ice, but also for protection. The deeper they went into the trees, the more he felt the weight of eyes upon them. It was the same feeling he had yesterday, only stronger now. Something was close, waiting, watching. When they reached the stream, Ethan knelt, breaking through the thin ice with the axe. Cold water shimmered beneath, and he dipped the buckets in, filling them slowly. The woman stayed close, her hands gripping the blanket like armor. Her eyes darted from shadow to shadow, lips pressed tight. Then she froze. "Ethan," she whispered sharply, her voice trembling, "we are not alone." Ethan lifted his head, following her gaze across the stream. Half hidden behind the trees, shapes moved. At first, they seemed like shadows. But then he saw the glow of eyes, yellow and sharp. Tall figures stepped forward, their bodies covered in dark armor, their claws glinting against the snow. There were 3 of them, maybe more behind the trees. One of them laughed, a deep, cruel sound that made the woman flinch. "Well, well," the armored alien growled, his voice rough like broken stone. "So this is where the shame hides." His gaze shifted to Ethan, and his mouth curled into a grin. "And she has found herself a human pet." The woman gasped, clutching Ethan's arm. "Don't," she whispered. "They are stronger than you." But Ethan's grip tightened on the axe, his body standing tall. He had faced bears in these woods, storms that could kill a man, hunger that nearly broke him. He was not about to step aside for anyone who mocked him at his own stream. You want her, you'll have to go through me, Ethan said firmly, his voice echoing in the cold air. The alien warriors laughed, their breaths misting in the winter air. Through you. One sneered, raising a jagged spear. You are nothing, human, nothing but weak flesh. Before Ethan could answer, the warrior charged, snow flying under his heavy steps. The woman screamed, but Ethan held his ground. At the last moment, he swung the axe upward, the blade catching the alien across the chest. The armor cracked, sparks flying as the warrior stumbled back. Roaring in rage, Ethan moved quickly, grabbing one of the buckets and throwing the icy water into his attacker's face. The shock made the alien stumble again, blinded for a moment. The second warrior rushed forward, swinging his claws. Ethan ducked low, rolling in the snow. The claws slicing the air where his head had been, he swung the axe again, striking the alien's leg. A deep growl filled the woods as the warrior fell to one knee. Ethan's heart pounded, his breath sharp and fast. He was outnumbered, outmatched, but not broken. The woman clutched the blanket tighter, her body trembling, yet she did not run. She watched Ethan fight with wide eyes full of shock. She had never seen a human before him. Never known they could fight with such raw fury. Ethan, she cried, as another warrior stepped forward. Lifting a heavy blade, Ethan turned just in time. Raising the axe to block, the clash ringing like thunder, the force drove him back, his boots digging deep into the snow. His arms ached, his breath came hard, but he refused to let go. Leave her? Ethan shouted, pushing back with every ounce of strength. The warrior snarled, his glowing eyes burning with hatred. She does not belong. Human, she is filth, and you will die with her. With a roar, Ethan twisted, breaking free and swinging. His axe in a wide arc, the blade bit into the warrior's shoulder. Dark blood spraying onto the snow. The forest went silent for a heartbeat. Only the sound of their breathing filling the air. The wounded alien staggered, glaring at Ethan with fury. Then, slowly, the warriors stepped back, their eyes burning. This is not over. One growled. She cannot hide here forever, and you, human, will pay for this insult. With that, they retreated into the trees, their shadows fading into the gray light. Ethan stood still, his chest heaving, his axe dripping with blood. The woman rushed to his side, clutching his arm, her eyes wide. With disbelief, you fought them, she whispered, her voice trembling. You fought them and lived. Ethan shook his head, his body heavy with exhaustion. They'll be back, he said quietly, and next time they won't leave so easily. The woman looked at him, tears welling in her eyes. For the first time, she felt a spark of hope where only fear had lived. But that hope was mixed with dread, because she knew what Ethan had just done. He had made himself part of her war, and there was no turning back. The cabin smelled of smoke and blood. Ethan sat at the table, cleaning the blade of his axe with a piece of cloth. His arms ached, his knuckles were bruised, and his breath still felt heavy from the fight. Across the room, the alien woman sat, close to the fire, the blanket wrapped tight around her body, her face pale but her eyes burning with emotion. She had not spoken since they returned from the stream. Her hands shook slightly as she held a cup of hot water. Steam rising in the cold air of the cabin. Ethan glanced at her, waiting, knowing she had something to say. At last, she looked up, her lips trembling as if each word weighed more than her strength. You don't understand, she whispered, her voice breaking. You should have let them take me. Ethan frowned, his jaw tightening. You wanted me to stand aside. After what they called you, after how they treated you. Her eyes filled with tears, her head shaking slowly. You don't know what I carry, she said, her voice rising. You don't know why they hunt me, why my husband cast me out. She leaned closer to the fire, her reflection flickering. In the flames, I was born between two clans, two enemies, she whispered. My father and mother should never have been together. Their union was forbidden. Their blood mixed inside me and to both clans. That makes me cursed, unclean. A danger to their power. Ethan listened, his brows furrowed. He had suspected her story was more than abandonment. But now the truth was unfolding like a wound. My husband married me only for alliance. She continued, her voice bitter. He thought binding himself to both clans would give him power. But when pressure came, when whispers grew, he turned. Against me, he said my blood would destroy him, and so he left me here to vanish quietly in the snow. Her words cracked as tears rolled down her face. He wanted to erase me without guilt, to wash his hands clean while his brothers hunted. Me, her fingers clenched tightly around the cup. Her shoulders trembling, they want me gone because as long as I breathe, the shame of both clans still lives. Ethan leaned back, his axe resting on the table. His eyes softened as he watched her. So that's why they won't stop. He said quietly. She nodded, wiping her tears with the edge of the blanket. They will chase me until I am gone. And anyone who stands with me will be hunted too. The fire popped, sparks leaping into the air. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence heavy, but full of unspoken thoughts. Finally, Ethan broke it, his voice steady. I don't care what they think of your blood, he said. I care about the fact that you're here. Breathing, not lying frozen in the snow. Her eyes widened, her lips parting as if to protest. But no words came. Only a small sob that escaped her throat. She turned her face away, hiding it in the blanket. For the first time since she had come to his door, her tears were not only of fear but of relief. That night, as the wind howled outside, Ethan checked the door twice, barring it tight. He set traps around the cabin, simple snares that might give him warning if anything approached. Inside, the woman sat quietly, watching him with wide eyes. When he finally sat down near the fire, she spoke softly. Why do you do this, Ethan? You don't know me, yet you fight for me. He looked at her. His expression calm but firm. Because you knocked on my door, he said simply. And once a door is opened, I don't close it again. Her lips trembled, a strange mix of gratitude and sorrow passing over her face. You don't know what that means, she whispered. No one ever stood for me. Not my family, not my husband, not anyone. Her voice cracked, her body shaking, and now, you a human. Someone outside it all you risk your life for me. Ethan said nothing more, letting the silence speak. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes drifting to the window. The forest outside was dark, hiding dangers among the trees. But for the first time, the cabin felt warmer. Not just because of the fire, but because of the bond slowly forming inside. The woman finally curled near the fire, resting her head on the blanket. Her eyes heavy with exhaustion, her breathing slowed, her body relaxing for the first time in days. Ethan watched her quietly, his axe close by, his mind still restless. He had learned the truth, but knowing it did not ease the danger. If anything, it made the threat sharper, clearer, more impossible to escape. The night stretched long, the snow falling harder. Ethan kept the fire alive, his eyes never far from the door. The woman's whispered confession echoed in his mind. Her blood was the reason she was hunted, but now that he had fought for her, her blood was also his burden. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, letting the warmth of the flames touch his skin. He knew the truth now, and with the truth came choice, but deep down, he already knew what he had chosen the moment he opened the door. The wind outside howled like a beast, shaking the cabin walls. Ethan stood by the window, his axe resting in his hand, his eyes searching the tree line. Snow fell heavy, covering the ground. Yet through the storm, he saw movement, dark shapes. In the forest, tall and broad, glowing eyes flickering like fire in the shadows. They had returned, more of them this time. Their patience replaced by hunger. The woman sat by the fire, clutching the blanket around her body, her face pale with fear. "They will not stop," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They come with more now. They come to finish it." Ethan did not answer, his jaw tight, his heart steady like stone. He knew she was right. This was not a visit. This was an invasion. They would not knock this time. They would break the door and drag her into the snow. The first crash came like thunder, the door rattling in its frame. The woman gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Another strike followed, wood splintering. Dust falling from the beams. The firelight flickered wildly, shadows dancing across the walls like restless spirits. Ethan lifted his axe, his stance strong, his eyes cold. With resolve, "Stay behind me," he said firmly, his voice sharp. The woman shook her head, her tears shining in the firelight. "They will kill you, Ethan. They will not stop until you are gone too." Ethan looked at her, his grip tightening on the weapon. "Then let them try," he said, his voice low but filled with fire. With a final crash, the door burst open, wooden pieces flying across the room. 4 warriors stepped inside. Their armor dark, their claws sharp, their eyes glowing with hate. The leader stepped forward, his voice deep and cruel. "Human, step aside," he growled. "She belongs to us. She is filth. She has no place in your world or ours." Ethan stood tall, the fire behind him, the axe in his hands. "You want her. You'll have to kill me first," he said, his words ringing in the small cabin. The warriors laughed, the sound sharp and mocking. "Then you choose death, human," the leader said, raising his weapon high. But before he could strike, the woman cried out, her voice breaking the air. "No." She shouted, her body trembling. "I will not return. I will not be their shame. I would rather die here." Her words froze the room for a heartbeat, the warriors turning their eyes toward her. Ethan glanced back at her, his heart heavy but proud. She had chosen too, her choice clear in her trembling but steady voice. The leader snarled, his fangs glinting in the firelight. "Then you both die," he spat, stepping forward. But Ethan lifted his axe and shouted, his voice booming. "Like thunder, she stays with me. She is mine now." The words struck the room like a weapon. The woman's eyes widened, her breath catching. The warriors froze, their expressions shifting, confusion breaking through their rage. Among their kind, those words carried weight. Far more than Ethan could know. To claim someone as mine was not just speech. It was binding, a vow of protection, a mark of honor. The leader growled low, his eyes narrowing. "You dare?" he hissed. "A human dares claim what we have cast out." Ethan did not waver, his stance unyielding. "I dare," he said, his voice calm but strong. "And I will kill any who tries to take her again." For a long moment, silence filled the cabin, broken only by the fire's crackle and the woman's sharp breaths. The warriors exchanged looks, their jaws tight, their claws twitching. They wanted to strike, to end it here, but the weight of tradition chained them. Among their kind, once claimed, once protected, a life could not be taken without dishonor. To kill her now would not erase shame, it would multiply it. The leader's eyes burned with fury, his breath misting in the cold air. "This is not the end," he growled, his voice deep and dangerous. He turned sharply, his cloak brushing the broken door as he stepped back into the snow. The others followed, their glowing eyes fading into the storm. The cabin fell silent once more, but the silence was heavier than ever. Ethan lowered the axe slowly, his arms shaking with tension. Behind him, the woman stared, her lips parted, her body trembling. "You claimed me," she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. "You spoke the words you could not understand." Ethan turned to her, his face calm but tired. "I only meant to keep you safe," he said, his voice steady. "Nothing else matters." Tears slid down her cheeks, her hands clutching the blanket tightly. "You don't know what you've done," she whispered. "You've bound yourself to me. In their eyes, in their law, I am yours now." Ethan said nothing, only nodded once, as if the weight did not scare him. In truth, he already knew. The moment he opened his door to her, he had chosen this path. The fire burned low, casting long shadows on the broken walls. Outside, the storm raged, hiding the warriors, but not erasing their promise to return. Inside, the cabin felt both safer and more dangerous than ever, for the woman was no longer just a stranger at his door. She was his now, in trust, in danger, in a war that would not end easily. The storm outside had finally begun to quiet. But the cabin still felt heavy with shadows. The broken door was patched with wood and rope, but it could not hide the damage or the danger. Ethan sat by the fire, sharpening his axe, the sound of stone against steel echoing in the small room. Across from him, the alien woman sat silently, her eyes on the flames, her face pale and thoughtful. Hours had passed since the warriors left, but their presence still lingered like a weight pressing on the cabin. Every creak of the wood, every gust of wind made the woman flinch. She pulled the blanket closer, her hands trembling, her body refusing to believe they were truly gone. Ethan glanced at her, his eyes softening for a moment. "They won't come tonight," he said, his voice steady. Though deep inside he knew they would return one day, stronger and angrier. The woman looked at him, her lips parting, her voice low and uncertain. "You claimed me," she whispered. "You spoke words that bind us, words that even they cannot break." Ethan set down the axe, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. "I only said what I felt in that moment." He answered, "That you are not theirs to take, not while I live." Her eyes filled with tears, her shoulders shaking. "No one has ever stood for me," she said softly. "No one has ever chosen me. Not my family, not my husband, not even my own people, but you. A human, a stranger. You claimed me when all others cast me out." Her voice cracked, and she turned her face away. Ashamed of her tears, Ethan stood and walked to her, his steps slow but steady. He knelt beside her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "You're not alone anymore," he said simply. The woman trembled, her body tense. But then slowly, she leaned against him. For the first time since arriving at his door, she allowed herself to rest. Her head pressed against his chest, her tears soaking into his shirt. Ethan held her quietly, his strong arms wrapping around her fragile frame. No words were needed. The silence between them carried more than speech. The fire burned low, filling the cabin with soft light. Outside, the snow glowed faintly under the moon. The world quiet after the storm. Inside, the two of them stayed close, sharing warmth not just from the fire, but from each other. Time passed, and slowly her trembling eased. Her breathing became calm, steady, safe, when the fire began to fade. Ethan rose, laying more wood onto the flames. The woman looked at him, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "You should rest," he said, his voice quiet. Her lips trembled, her gaze lowering to the floor. "I cannot sleep alone," she whispered, her words filled with fear. "Not after what happened, not after what they said. I cannot close my eyes unless I know you are near." Ethan hesitated, then nodded slowly. He pulled the blanket tighter around her and guided her toward the small bed in the corner of the cabin. The bed was narrow, made for one, but there was No other place. She lay down first, curling against the wall. Her body tense as if expecting rejection, Ethan set his axe beside the bed. Then lay down carefully beside her. At first, there was distance. A space between them filled with silence and fear. But as the minutes passed, the woman shifted. Inching closer, her body pressed against his side, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft as the falling snow outside. Ethan turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting hers in the faint glow of the fire. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "You only need to live." Her eyes filled again with tears. But this time they were not from sorrow alone. For the first time in her life, she felt the weight of protection, of being wanted, not as property or shame, but as someone worth standing for. Her breathing slowed, her body finally relaxing. And soon she drifted into sleep, her face soft and peaceful against his shoulder. Ethan lay awake, staring at the dark ceiling, his mind heavy with thought. He knew this peace was fragile as the patched door. The warriors would come again, and next time there might be no retreat. But he also knew one thing with certainty. He had chosen, and there was no turning back. His eyes drifted to the window, where the moonlight touched the snow. The world outside was still dangerous, filled with enemies, but inside his cabin, for this moment, there was peace. The woman shifted in her sleep, curling closer, her hand resting against his chest. Ethan placed his hand gently over hers, his heart steady. She was his now, not as property, but as trust, as bond, as promise. The fire burned low, the night stretched on, and the storm clouds slowly cleared. And in the small wooden cabin, deep in the frozen forest, a human and an alien woman shared the same bed, not as strangers, not as enemies, but as two souls bound by survival, choice, and something neither of them yet understood. The night was quiet, but both knew it was only the beginning. Because while the world outside still plotted their end, inside these walls, something stronger had begun to grow.